those just joining us, we'll get started in a few minutes, and we are streaming live to YouTube and recording this and just checking the audio for YouTube. Thanks for joining us this evening. If you're just joining, thanks for joining us. We'll get started in about 3 or 4 minutes. Hi, I apologize for the delay in starting. We have a couple of staff people who are not able to get in, so they're just getting in, and then we will get started momentarily. Thank you. Hello, I apologize for the delay in getting started. We had a little bit of technical difficulties with a couple of staff folks who are still getting signed on, but we will do some introductions. Thank you so much for joining us for the rulemaking hearing for the takeoff and landing of UAS or drones in state parks. We'll do some introductions and a background. Tonight's agenda is to welcome and do introductions. We'll provide background explanation on the proposed rules and the rulemaking process and next steps. And then we'll take questions on the process or clarifications on the proposed rules. We're not able to specifically answer all questions about what would happen if the rules were implemented and things like that. Some of those questions we may encourage you to put in your public comments, and then it will be an opportunity to provide comments. I will call on folks in the order that you registered, and anyone who is on the list, I have your name and that you registered to attend the hearing. So I will call on you in the order that you registered, and you will have 3 minutes to provide your comments. And if you wish to not comment, you can just say pass and we'll move on to the next person. Before we move on to the rest of the PowerPoint, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'll have the OPRD staff that are on here join me and share. And I'm going to get one more staff person on up here on the screen and we'll introduce ourselves. So my name is Katie Gauthier. I am the rulemaking coordinator for the drone rules. And if I could have the other staff members who are on, introduce yourselves as well.
Hi, Katie. This is Matt Davey, park manager at Smith Rock State Park. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. For some reason, I can't put my video on right now, but yep, I'm here. So park manager from Smith Rock, Matt Davey.
Here, now you can share your video. Sorry.
Got it. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Jody House. I work with Katie in the Government Relations and Policy Unit, and I'm just here to track comments and help answer questions.
Hi, I'm Brady Callahan, and I'm the OPRD Geospatial Team Lead and also the Unmanned Aircraft System Coordinator for the department.
Great, thank you. And Joe, can you answer Patrick's question in the Q&A? He's just wanting to know staff members that are here. So
It's actually not coming up for me.
oh, let me make you a co-host and then you'll see them. Okay, good. Can you see it now?
No.
Oh, sorry. We'll get the technical difficulties resolved.
Still is not coming up for me. If somebody could ask. Ah, done the introductions. I see it now. Thank you.
Good. Okay. So I will share my screen again and we'll go back to the presentation to give you a little bit more about what we're going to do this evening. So we wanted to provide some background on what we've done with drones over the past few years and how we got to the place that we are today. We have been working with UAS and drone policy since around 2016. Brady started working on our internal use policy at that point. We developed a policy for the use of drones within state parks and data storage. We've been using drones for research and scientific purposes, and we have an internal policy for that purpose. And that was developed with an internal or an external stakeholder committee. After that policy was developed, we started looking at a policy around the use of drones by visitors. A group was working on developing that policy, and then we consulted with the Department of Justice. And we'd had visitors specifically asking for administrative rules on how drones could be and should be used within state parks. And Department of Justice advised us that there's a specific statute that requires that the legislature authorize a state agency to go into rulemaking if we're going to do anything around drone regulations. So in 2019, we did seek legislative approval to write rules around the takeoff and landing of drones. And that was approved by the 2021 legislature. Senate Bill 109 was enacted that allows OPRD to write rules for the takeoff and landing of UAS in state parks. And so that's when we started the process for rulemaking and had a rule advisory committee that met and helped to develop and discuss the proposed rules that we're getting public comment on today. In the meantime, we have been managing the use of drones within state parks. They are currently allowed, but individual parks have limited and prohibited usage if they're endangering natural or cultural resources, if there's a risk to people or property, or if they're interfering with some form of recreation. They are prohibited seasonally during snowy plover season on the ocean, on specific sections of the ocean shore, but we don't have clarity about when and where the takeoff and landing of drones are allowed. So that's at the purpose for the rulemaking that we're seeking to put into place. Just a little bit about how other agencies are managing drones. The Federal Aviation Administration is the only agency that can regulate airspace. So in the proposed rules, you will see that we are only talking about the takeoff and landing of drones on OPRD property. We have no jurisdiction over airspace, and we have no jurisdiction over takeoff and landing outside of OPRD. FAA writes rules to guide recreation and commercial operation of drones. So there are existing rules and laws that guide how drones can operate. Local jurisdictions can only provide guidance for the takeoff and landing. This sign here is a guidance from the FAA about what a sign could look like. It's not necessarily what the sign would look like in OPRD, but it would be similar to this. Currently, takeoff and landing of drones are prohibited in many national parks, national monuments, and Forest Service designated wildlife areas and some wildlife refuges. So the proposed rules that we are seeking public comment on this evening would allow for the department to create zones where takeoff and landing of drones would be prohibited. They would be prohibited automatically in overnight facilities. So the main campground area is defined as an overnight facility, and we would prohibit drone takeoff and landing in those zones. And prohibition zones would be designated based on visitor safety, sensitive natural, scenic, and cultural resources, and user conflict. The proposed zones would be posted on our website for 30 days. In the open areas, drone operators would be required to operate in a reasonable and prudent manner based on the area conditions. Existing wildlife protection rules and laws would apply. And then drone operators could apply for a permit to take off or land in a closed area, and that the permits would be available and offered based on conditions and a conversation with park staff to see if that was an opportunity. Public safety agencies would not need approval to fly during emergencies. If the rules were approved, OPRD would work with park managers and stakeholders to evaluate areas that should be closed either year-round or seasonally. The proposed areas would be posted on our website, and then we would create maps, post those on our website, and share those with other agencies. And education efforts for operating drones responsibly and where drones are allowed or areas that are closed would be our next step. So I think we talked a little bit about the process. Before I go on to the process for the hearing, are there questions about the process that we've gone through and the rules specifically that are being proposed?
Katie, we have one in the chat. Danielle Tucker is asking, what is happening to the current OAR 736-1049? A person may only distribute circulars, notices, leaflets, pamphlets, or written or printed information of any kind within a park property.
We're not proposing to change that. The only thing that we're adding to that rule is that you could get a permit for drone operations. So we're adding to that rule that drone operations are allowed under the special use permit process. So that's where that rule is having an addition. But we're not changing the process or how leaflets are allowed.
We have one more question from Anne. How have you integrated expertise about potential impacts to birds and wildlife in this process?
So we have had a rule advisory committee that has met and talked about where development of the rules, and we will continue to work with stakeholders and agencies to determine the specific locations. So that's really where we'll work with wildlife experts on what locations should be open or where there are wildlife impacts, that those areas should be closed. So that's kind of where we'll be looking to wildlife experts to tell us areas that there would be a sensitive natural resource impact that the area should be closed. Matt, you look like you were wanting to add something there.
No, it's going to be basically though, and each site's going to have its own work group analyzing it, involving the park manager, rangers, and other stakeholders. So it's just going to be on a case-by-case basis.
But we have spoken with different stakeholder groups about what their concerns are around wildlife impacts as we've moved through this process.
Mark would like to know what would be required for special drone permits.
You want to cover that one? Yeah.
Yeah, well, and again, you know, the way we're looking at it is if an area is specifically prohibited for flying a drone, those would be the areas where you would need to get otherwise you won't need a permit to fly a drone. So if it's in a prohibited area, you're going to need to reach out to the park manager or one of the designated staff to see if a permit's going to be necessary, or they may just give you permission after a conversation. So it's really going to be only to fly in areas that have either a seasonal or a year-round restriction on drones for protection concerns, whether that's natural, cultural, or recreation related. And so it'll really just help put some guidelines so that the drone operator, when they come out to the park, will have less likelihood of causing a conflict when they're at the park. So the permit is really just about making sure that it's going to reduce any chance of conflict.
We have a couple more questions. Philip asked, given that no conservation groups or wildlife agencies were involved in the first RAC meeting, are you going to revisit decisions made in that meeting?
Well, I would say we did include conservation groups in the second RAC meeting, and no decision made in the first meeting was different, or was both meetings discussions were used in order to be recommendations for the proposed rules. If there are any concerns that the first meeting decisions weren't, or the second meeting decisions weren't taken into consideration, or there were things that were missed, those are the types of comments that we really would like to see. And so I would encourage you to put that in as a public comment if there are areas that you think that the rules are missing, or that there are concerns that haven't been addressed fully.
Tim Palmer is asking, have you surveyed park users on this issue?
I'm trying to think if there's any, I don't know that I know the answer to that. Over the years, I don't know if Matt or Brady, you have any?
There's been, not that I'm aware of, any specific survey regarding drones in parks. At least since I've been here, I haven't seen anything specific to that. People could comment on drones for other visitor surveys regarding their experience at the park, and then this public comment period kind of helps to address that for park visitors on both ends. So this is that opportunity to chime in during that public comment period.
And Patrick would like to know, no cost for permits.
It's hard to say. There may be the cost. We're not looking to make the cost prohibitive or exclusive, or that shouldn't be a hindrance to getting a permit to fly a drone. Now, if it just depends. There is a cost associated when it's a commercial use for a drone, and we're working through a lot of other resource concerns or logistical concerns. So there may be a higher cost when it's associated with a commercial use permit. If it's going to be a recreational use request to fly a drone, less likelihood that there would be a substantial cost to that. Some parks may still institute that there is a $100 processing fee to get a permit with state parks. However, that can be waived per manager discretion. So it depends, is I guess really the only way I can answer that right now. But it's likely not supposed to be a hindrance or a huge cost to stop people from reaching out to parks. Comments are really coming in.
I'm sorry, my computer.
Joe, it sounds like your computer froze. I can read, I think. I'm on to the next. And it's a question about UAV backgrounds of our staff and whether there was anyone developing the rules that had Part 107 pilots and whether Kenji Sugahara was involved. And yes, we did have individuals with Part 107 pilot certification that were involved. So we have tried to include a wide variety of people involved, and Kenji was involved with both the legislation and the Rule Advisory Committee.
Yeah, if I can expand on that one just a bit, Katie, my recollection is that there was at least 3 or 4 Part 107 certified pilots that were part of the Rules Advisory Committee.
Yes. And then Patrick is asking about the duration of the permits, yearly, monthly, daily. They're typically daily, but there may be some opportunities for us to look at different options if in different circumstances. Is that fair, Matt?
Yeah. Yeah, they are typically daily or for, a few consecutive days if you're looking at doing a project. It's not just going to be a open wide permit for a year. The reason why, it's because that area that you would be needing a permit to fly a drone in has got a lot of resource concerns for flying drones. So it's really to limit some of the drone use and put tighter guardrails and around that use, and to open that up for anyone to just come in and request a permit and get it for an entire year would negate the reason why we would have that prohibition at that site. So it's unlikely that one user would just get a pass after meeting a few guidelines, because those can change and it might need to be reassessed too. So they would typically be short duration permits.
And as Matt said, there's not a need for a permit in areas that are open. So it would only be in the areas. There is a question about, or a statement that there needs to be a generalized scientific permit. And Brady, we do have a scientific research permits, and we have worked through that process. Do you want to talk a little bit about what the process is currently for drone use for scientific research?
Sure, we already have a generalized scientific research permit process that covers any kind of research that happens within Oregon State Parks. And drones can be included in that research, or it can be the specific research. And that's fine. And we address that through our scientific research permit process, where we review what the application is, what the applicant wants to do, and the same as we will do in other cases, evaluate the impacts or potential impacts to both cultural and natural resources and to visitors in order to make a determination as to whether that could be an acceptable use. So it is included, drone use is included in the scientific research process now.
Joe, do you want to go back to the questions? I think we're on to John Ellinger's question.
Sure, no problem. And sorry about my technical challenges here on this end. John says, glad to hear. Next question is, what educational resources are going to be provided to the state park managers?
And I would say we will work with stakeholders, and there are a number of different entities that are interested in helping us on educational materials for visitors and for park staff. So we will do that as part of the implementation process.
Ryan is asking, why would you charge more for commercial permits when those are potentially more likely to promote your parks versus non-commercial? I say that from Eastern Oregon and like to promote Eastern Oregon, but have to pay more.
I think in general, do you want to talk, Matt, about why we charge for commercial use permits? Sometimes because the staffing necessary for that.
Yeah, commercial permits tend to cost a little bit more than just personal because there's more complexity with a commercial entity coming into the park. They have oftentimes more of an impact on that park than just a recreational user would that would have a permit for a non-traditional activity. So the commercial permits wouldn't just be for just to use the drone. It usually comes with, setting aside exclusive use of an area for parking, for staging, and sometimes we do have to assign park staff. So that comes with a fee on top of that too, so that staff is able to respond to any conflicts between the commercial use and the traditional or regular visitor base during that stay. So that's the only reason why I would say that a commercial permit would typically cost a little bit more, is they are just more complex.
The next comment says that there should be defined rules regarding the harassment of pilots while flying by the public. Harassing an operator while flying is a safety concern.
Great.
So-
We would encourage you to put that in as a public comment.
And that's a legit concern. And we do have rules around that. You can't just go and harass other park visitors at a state park. And if that happens, then typically, if a ranger is notified of that, we will respond to that. So that we do have rules around, being a public nuisance or being a public hazard, interfering with other people's enjoyment of the resource that day too. So I don't intend that could happen, and we will respond to that if it does occur.
And the next comment from John says, drones often get a bad rep from people who don't understand how useful and wonderful they can be for both commercial use and aerial photography. Just want to make sure park managers who are making decisions understand how useful they can be. That harassment ties back to my concern for educating park officials, so they aren't the ones hindering or unnecessarily restricting drone use just because they don't like them.
Great. Well, thank you, John. And I would encourage you to submit those as public comments either during the oral portion of this presentation or in the written portion. So I think we'll move on now to the official comment portion. Thank you for your questions. And if you didn't feel like your questions were sufficiently answered, please submit them as part of the public comment process. So I will go back to sharing the slides so you can see a little bit more. The process for the hearing where you are all sharing your comments. This is an opportunity to provide public comments. As I said earlier, there's no decision made at this hearing. Each person will have 3 minutes to comment. The commenters will be called in the order that you registered. The meeting is recorded and will be posted on our website. And if you don't wish to comment, you can just pass or log off at any time. And if you would like to submit any written comments, we do have a rulemaking site that you can submit them online. You can submit them in writing, and here's our address, or via our email address. Comments will be accepted until April 7th at 5 p.m. So I have an official script that I have to read when we open the public comment portion of the hearing, and then I'll go through and start calling on folks. So this hearing is now in session. It's being recorded to maintain the permanent record. My name is Katie Gauthier, and I'm the hearing officer. Today is March 30th, 2022, and the time is 6:33 p.m. The purpose of this hearing is to provide an opportunity for public comment on the proposed rule changes to OAR 736-010, 0015, 010, 0040, 021-0030-021-0100 by the Parks and Recreation Department regarding the takeoff and landing of drones in state parks and along the ocean shore. The agency invites comments on whether options should be considered for achieving the rule's goals while reducing the negative impacts on business. In addition to presenting oral comments at this hearing, anyone may submit written comments until 5 p.m. on April 7th, which is the close of the public comment period. Comments received after the close of the public comment period will not be reviewed or considered by the agency unless the agency decides to extend the public comment period for everyone. Send comments to the public comment mailbox or to the State Parks office. The addresses are posted on the PowerPoint on my screen. OPRD will not respond to questions during this hearing. After the close of the public comment period, staff will prepare a report to the agency, which will be available upon request and will be presented to the Parks Commission as they consider the adoption of the rules. If you have questions as part of your testimony, I would appreciate it if you could state those as a concern for the record. Please do not ask questions of those who are making formal comment. To provide better context for your comments, I may ask follow-up questions. Please respect each speaker. Anyone not presenting has been muted. I ask that you limit your comments to 3 minutes. Again, you may submit written comments up until the close of the comment period. The chat feature can be utilized for process questions, but we ask that any formal public comment be submitted in writing via mail, email, or online. When it is your turn to comment, you'll be moved to the presenter role and we will begin a timer. And after we go through, I'll just make sure that everyone has had an opportunity to comment. So we're going to stop sharing the screen and start the comment. So looks like Dennis White, you're up first, and so I will move you. Oh, Joe, you actually have to make me the host again.
Okay.
Thank you.
That work?
Yep. So Dennis, we're going to move you to a panelist, and then you can start your comments. And then after Dennis will be Patrick. And Dennis, you're welcome to share your video if you want, and then you can unmute and begin your comments.
Okay. Go.
Thank you.
Are we ready to go or?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. All right. Thank you. My name is Dennis White, and I'm with Friends of Otter Rock, which is a community advocacy group for the Otter Rock Marine Reserve. Our mission is to protect and preserve intertidal life, nesting and migrating birds, marine mammals in and around the area. And to that end, we're launching an interpretive program designed to inspire stewardship on the part of residents and visitors to the area. We've witnessed many instances of nest disturbances due to the presence of drones. So that's where I'm coming from. I'm not against the drone flight at all. It's just the careful presence of drones is fine. But due to the fact that visits of our members are irregular and short duration, the frequency of our observations of these disturbances can be multiplied several times over, however. There can be no doubt about the fact that drones are a disturbance and threat to nesting birds. One common and particularly notable drone flight that I have witnessed involved a flight over the Devil's Punch Bowl, causing an oystercatcher pair, which is a species of concern, to leave their nests and to ward off what they undoubtedly thought was a predator. Their eggs were left vulnerable to actual predators and unfriendly weather conditions that threaten reproductive success. I think it's obvious that visitors who come to enjoy the environment for whatever reason, we had 676,000 of them at the Punch Bowl in 2020. They are also disturbed, I think, by the noisy, intrusive, and to some creepy nature of drones, which often have cameras on board. So if you're there to experience the nature and the environment, this is, I think, a major disturbance for even visitors, in addition to wildlife. Otter Rock is just one site, but we're one of many along the coast which have similar concerns. And I would say that every coast with rocks on the cliff, on the cliffs or offshore rocks, as well as beach areas where birds such as snowy plover rest should be totally off limits. We have the following observations and recommendations. I emailed you, Katie, back in November expressing concern about the absence of conservation advocates on the Rules Committee as constituted at the time. There were numerous conservation advocates interested in participating. So our first concern is that the state did not follow its own policy to make, quote, good faith efforts to include all parties likely to be affected by the rule. The absence of the conservation advocates at the first meeting resulted in a dynamic that put the conservationists into, on the defense, and their interests were disadvantaged because the committee members from the first meeting assumed a position of defense of the draft, which in our opinion was flawed. As a result, some important recommendations were overruled at the second meeting. A key recommendation of conservation is that the posture of the rule be returned to what it was prior to this draft rule, namely that drone use be prohibited unless permitted, rather than permitted unless prohibited. Prior to this draft, which specifically addresses drones, the unrevised rules in 736 and OAR 736 activities such as drone use were prohibited unless permission was given. I say that because drone use fits into the requirement for permission, because and this is a quote from the unrevised rules, drone use could disturb the natural, cultural, scenic, and recreational resources in the ocean shore recreation area. It could pose a safety or access concerns for other ocean shore state recreation area users, or for those involved in events and activities. So, because of this kind of thing that happens, as I talked about, just actual disturbances being observed, there can be no question that drones can pose such a risk. The posture of prohibited unless permitted is also consistent with similar rules of the federal government, whose parks are often adjacent to the park, as is the case with Otter Rock and Cape Perpetua. So you might have even conflicting rules in almost the same place. Next, we're aware of the offer for U.S. Fish and Wildlife to be included in the RAC. Their expertise and extensive experience with drone rules would have been very valuable, not only because of their experience with drone launch in their parks, but to coordinate with their rules, which coordinate the airspace. In our opinion, it's insufficient to simply ask their advice on the sites that deserve launch prohibition. Another process recommendation concerns the director's role stated in the draft rule. We assume that director means the head of OPRD. The draft rule charges the director with determining the areas where drone launch is permitted or not permitted. We highly recommend that the rules provide for the director to establish an advisory committee consisting of agency, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, NGO, tribal experts, academic representatives, and so on to determine where drone launch should be permitted. Next, drone launch and landing should not be permitted at any time of the year in any zone of the coast with nesting birds or haul out and pupping areas. This includes all areas with rocky headlands and or offshore rocks within a mile of the shore and beach areas with plover nests and haul outs. The birds, even if they're nesting in the rocks a mile off, they come inshore into the shoreline. In areas of approved drone use, the rules should include restrictions consistent with those of airspace, including no takeoff or flight within 100 meters of observed birds or seals, discontinuation of approved use in areas where repeated wildlife disturbance occurs. Finally, improve enforcement mechanisms. The state and state those in the final rules. The state police are currently charged with enforcing wildlife protections, but those resources are inadequate. It's often the case that one or two officers assigned to this task is very far away from a disturbance and totally unable to arrive to the site in time. One possibility might be that might be included in the rules to facilitate this is to require registration of every launch and a notification for flights, and perhaps even requiring tracking capability, which is technology on many of the drones today. They have GPS trackers, so you can tell where they are. And then if you know who's launching, then that's traceable as well. So those are our comments for now, and I'll be submitting something, a written response along these lines as well, being sent to your specified website location. So thank you for your time and opportunity. We greatly appreciate the ability to offer comments here.
Thank you so much, Dennis. And so Patrick, you are in here, and if you want to unmute and start commenting. And then the next person will be Mark Marks.
Okay, I have unmuted. This is Pat Tuning. I do want to share my screen with the presentation, so I'm going to attempt to do that. Oh my gosh, it worked. Okay, so my comments revolve around the definition of a drone as proposed in the rules. I did submit these comments in the comment period. I am now submitting them during the public hearing portion. So a little bit of history about this. There is a tradition of flying unmanned objects on Oregon shores and state parks. Things like kite festivals and frisbee golf and frisbee on the beach and model gliders. The complaints and the problems seem to start with the recent introduction of drones, which are motorized flying devices. In the recent rulemaking meetings of 11 November and 24th of January, I participated in those, and the word motorized was included in some of the various drafts during those meetings. On February 15th or so, the rule wording was removed, the word motorized, and the reasoning that I was provided, this happened outside of the meetings, was to avoid specifying drone technology. Since that time, the public comments that have been provided that I can do a word search on made note of noise, buzzed, or loud, or variations of those words appeared 190 times during the comments through last week, March 25th. And that's, that's due to the motorized noise of what we call a drone. So this basically is the history of why I am adamant that we include the word motorized in our definition of drones. So the drone definition under the rules, it references a different revised statute that defines the unmanned aircraft system. It means an unmanned flying machine, its associated elements, and unmanned, well, kites and balloons and model gliders and frisbees are not manned, so that meets the definition. They do fly, kites, balloons, model gliders, frisbees, they fly. So they are drones according to this definition. And I don't think neither the Parks Department nor the legislature intended to regulate these non-drone devices, kites, balloons, model gliders, frisbees, etc. They're not drones and they're not current problems. Drone definition should include this. This is a drone. It's motorized, noisy. I mentioned, I think noise was mentioned 190 something times in the comments submitted to date. Motorized also allows it to hover and loiter in certain areas and for long distance flying out of sight of the operator. And they often include cameras, whereas these devices do not create noise. They do not create the level of problems you're seeing with the drones, and they do not typically contain cameras. These are unmanned flying objects, just like a drone, and they fit the definition of a drone, but these do not have motors. So the February 15th rule proposal took away the word motorized, which means that all these devices you see here are drones according to the current definition. I don't think that's the intent, and I certainly object to that. So the proposal is to add 2 simple words to your 2 simple definition areas of your rule proposal. Your current definition for the state park says that it's an unmanned aircraft system means a device under ORS 837. What I wanted to say is an unmanned aircraft system means a motorized device defined under that ORS. Same thing for your offshore rules. It uses the same definitional words, and I think it should also include the word motorized. The objection that was stipulated during the February 15th rule proposal was that the inclusion of the word motorized would make a burden to define the technology of drones, and that could be hard for park personnel to discern. Well, your existing rules currently already use the word motorized in 30 times. Things like motorboats, motorized vehicles, etc. So I don't think the proposal to include the word motorized creates an undue burden to discern the drone technology being used. Park personnel are smart people. They can already distinguish between cars and bicycles, surfboards and motorboats, etc. Anything that's motorized versus non-motorized. They should be able to easily distinguish between a motorized drone, the ones that make the noise, the ones that have the cameras, those are the motorized drones, and non-motorized flying devices that are silent. They don't have a propeller, etc. So in summary, I'd like to say that the existing definition of a drone in the proposed rule language is too inclusive. It includes non-motorized unmanned flying devices, kites, frisbees, model gliders, balloons, etc. The correct definition should add the word motorized, and then it would exclude these devices that are not drones and are not current problems.
Great,
Adding
thank
the
you.
word motorized is consistent with your park rules, and it does not create a burden. And that's the end of my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. Mark, you are, well, Patrick, if you could stop sharing your screen.
As soon as I figure out how, I will do that.
I think you're good. So Mark, you are in and you can unmute and or share your video if you'd like.
Mark has passed in the comments.
Oh, okay, great. So then we will move on to John Ellinger, and then Ryan, you're next. And John, as soon as you get in here, you can unmute and begin to share your comments.
Hey, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Cool. Okay. Just a quick background on me. I'm a remote sensing manager for a survey company in Oregon. We have offices in Washington, Oregon, the coast, Bend, Portland, and I manage a team of pilots. Professionally, I use drones to do aerial mapping to survey the land. And I also use them personally as a photographer on the side. I think that, I think the plan for this is a good plan. I love nature. I love conservation. I love protecting the wildlife out there and stuff. But I'm also an avid drone flyer who enjoys, I consider a drone not creepy. I consider a drone a flying camera. And I think that Oregon has some amazingly beautiful places to capture with a flying camera. So I think that drone pilots in general want to be respectful of both people and wildlife out there. So I guess my comments are, I'd like to really push education with this. Having signs up that say no drone use can work, but I would rather see effort put into putting up signs that say, you can't take off here because of these reasons. I know that, in a site like Otter Rock or something, if there was a sign that said, no drone use here, and then why, I think that would go a long ways. And I think that that's going to be the responsibility of each respective state park. I know on the coast, you can specify the snowy plovers. You can explain that. And something to think about with drones is you can, even if you prevent somebody from taking off and landing in certain areas, like if you provide a permit or let them do it in certain areas, you can still fly a mile away with that drone. And, you could fly over snowy plovers. You could fly along the cliff edges, of nesting birds. So some education out there for the drone pilots that want to capture beautiful imagery along the coast or other state parks should be why. Where, when, why, all these things are important to have posted, just so people can know. And I guess maybe is if there's options to provide time periods where people can fly, like I know on the coast we have the Peter Irondale shipwreck is closed during certain times of the year to people driving up to it for safety and don't want to disturb other things. Maybe the same thing could go with these drone rules. Maybe certain times of the year, places can't be allowed. And my other comment was kind of what I was chatting about earlier. Drones get a bad rap. You always have these bad players out there that are using them inappropriately. But they also can be incredibly advantageous. I use a drone to fly the jetties along the coast in multiple state parks for our company, for construction companies that are rebuilding the jetties. And by using the drones, it prevents our crew members from going out on those rocks during dangerous situations. So in my use case, drones are actually saving lives. So they're very advantageous in some ways. And then, you have a few bad players that can really ruin it for the rest of us. So I would say push education when it comes to, putting out these rules and talking to the state park, representative and officials, educate them in how drones can be beneficial and also how drones can be, detrimental and bothersome to people. So I guess that's my only point. I'm all on board. I think that there's a lot of places along the coast that, should be protected and should have these things blocked. I know that I've gotten really upset with seeing other drone operators flying around campgrounds and disturbing people and stuff. So I think I think this is long overdue. But at the same time, a blanket ban on all drones along the coast, I think is a horrible idea. it's just too beautiful to not capture from the sky. So, and if you can just educate people and explain to them why they shouldn't fly and what it may do to the wildlife, I think that you'll have people following the rules.
Great.
That's it.
Thank you so much, John. Daniel Tucker, you are in if you want to unmute, and then after you will be Scott and then Ann.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I'm very glad that you guys are pushing forward on some drone regulations. It's something that is needed as drones technology is becoming more affordable for the common people. What I paid, several grand for a few years ago, people can pick up for half the price today. My name's Dan Tucker. I am an owner of The View From Up Here. I'm a drone photographer and a professional photographer. I'm also an Army vet, and I have spent the last 20 years in a government regulatory agency. My main, not really questions, concerns is I'm kind of concerned about this. It ended up being a patchwork between different state parks on how this is pulled off, because each state park manager is going to have their own views on drones. What I think would be ideal, and as we're stepping into this new world of regulating drones in parks, is to have a permit system that to fly a drone in a park, you need a permit to fly it. I mean, just have people apply, and that way, if someone is being a bad actor, a park ranger can go up and say, "Where's your permit?" And that's the first thing they can do to kick them out of the park. Just have it as part of the website, and that way, when they have the restrictions placed on different areas, that can be put on the website, and they apply for a permit for that day, is denied, or they can only fly from 6 a.m. to 8 a.m. or something. That way, the park managers and park and regulations can have more control over all their parks by adding a permit process. I know that's a little beyond of what you're doing right now, but I think it'd be something that we should look into in the future. Also, drones, all human activity disrupts wildlife. Highway 101 runs right alongside the coast and causes, havoc all the time. So I want to just make sure that drones aren't being, picked out as a bad actor of all the other human activity that are affecting things, in our world. I'd like to see some factual data of drone instances that were, why are we, actually making these regulations? There's a need for them, everybody agrees, but how many instances of actually drones causing harm to natural wildlife, besides people saying they don't like the sound of a swarm of bees going by them? Anyway, that's basically my comments, and thank you very much for giving me time to speak. And I really appreciate the rulemaking process, and that we are making rules on this at this time. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Dan. Scott, you're next, and you, let me make sure that you're in here. Oh. I apologize, you haven't been promoted yet. We're actually going to go to Ann. You're next, and then I'll get Scott. So Ann, you can unmute and start.
Okay. Hello there. Thank you very much for this opportunity to comment. My name is Ann Velisis, and I'm president of the Kalmiopsis Audubon Society. Our group has more than 400 members on the South Coast who care about habitat for birds and wildlife, and who cherish the opportunity to hike and enjoy and observe the beautiful natural environments of our coastal state parks on a regular basis. And our concerns reflect those two perspectives. As Audubon president, I've heard from many members about drones and birds, including reports of drones harassing osprey nests. Last year, the Oregon Black Oyster Catcher Project, which many of our members participate in, documented a rate of over 3 drone disturbances per week on active nests. And up the coast, I know there's been drone harassment of puffins. I was really troubled to learn that the process by which these draft rules were developed did not include early consultation with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the agency that manages our nearshore seabirds and has specific expertise with birds and drones already. I was also disappointed to learn that state parks did not engage with conservation groups early in this process. And it's my understanding that instead, state parks allowed drone users to set the proposed framework for limited regulation of drone use in the very first RAC meeting. I find this to be so extremely disappointing and outrageous. A big reason our members and many other people love to visit our coastal parks is to watch birds and wildlife. And so I strongly urge state parks to take impacts to birds and wildlife into more serious consideration and to determine where to allow drones based on the best available science, to draw science into this process. Beyond impacts to wildlife, I've also had and have heard from several of our members about negative personal experiences with drones. Buzzing loud and low overhead of people who are otherwise enjoying moments of serenity while beach walking or watching the sunset over the Pacific. And it breaks my heart to think that we will lose still more places to restore our spirits without the incursion of more noisy technologies. Our beloved Oregon state parks are popular destinations with increasing visitation. And so I think we need OPRD to be proactive now about protecting these exceptional visitor experiences and minimizing wildlife disturbances into the future. I'm concerned that the currently proposed regulations take the general approach of allowing drone use everywhere, except for some few places where they will be restricted. I strongly urge you to reverse this framework and recommend instead that all state parks and beaches be closed to drone takeoff and landings, except where they can be safely allowed and/or by special permit. I think state parks should convene an independent technical working group to determine the appropriate designated drone takeoff and landing areas that can minimize wildlife, recreation, and cultural impacts. I want to thank you very much for running this process and for taking public comments. And I'm glad that State Parks is taking this on. Thank you for considering my comments.
Thank you very much, Anne, for being here. Scott, I'm having a hard time getting you into as a presenter. So we'll move on and then I can allow you to speak if we can't get you in. So right now I have next is Tim Palmer, and then we'll do Philip Johnson, and then we'll go back to you, Scott, to see how we can get you. So Tim, if you want to unmute.
Hi there. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Can you see me?
I cannot see you.
Okay.
Oh, now I can.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you. I wish I had known about this sooner. I only learned today, so I'm kind of winging this. But I would like to focus on just two numbers here. One is 52 million. And some of you in the agency might recognize that as the number of visitors we have in state parks annually. I would hazard to guess here that the only members of that 52 million group who actually want to have drones in parks are the people operating the drones. And so that's not going to be very many people, and it's certainly not going to be a majority. So I would encourage you to survey, as I indicated in my question, what your park users, how they feel about this issue. I would encourage you to survey professional wildlife professionals and others, because most of us do not want the noise, the hassle, the intrusion of this. That is not what we go to state parks for. The second number I wanted to call attention to here is 0.2%. 1/5 of 1% is the land included in state parks in Oregon. 0.2% of Oregon is state parks. That means that drones can be used in almost all of the rest of that area. There's almost no place we can go that's protected from this intrusion of the noise, the privacy invasion, and the other problems with wildlife and intrusion that drones present. We should be able to do that in state parks. I think state parks are there for recreation, they're for peace, for solitude, for people to go to enjoy nature, not to hear this buzzing racket overhead, flying back and forth, harassing wildlife at times, and troubling people. So again, I encourage you to survey your users, to survey wildlife professionals. I would encourage you to do everything possible to ban drone use in state parks, period, except for official uses by state park personnel, which cover those wildlife and safety issues that a few other people have mentioned here tonight. And in those areas where you don't have legislative authority to regulate drones, which in itself is outrageous that you don't have control of your own parks, but in those cases, turn your legislative affairs staff loose on the state legislature or the United States Congress if necessary to get the control that you need to have over our state parks to make them be the kind of places that most Oregonians cherish for their quiet and the nature that should be dominant there. Thank you very much.
Thank you for being here tonight, Tim. And Philip Johnson, you are next.
Hi, thank you for the opportunity to speak. I had not intended to say anything in this meeting, so these are just off-the-cuff remarks. I'm a belatedly appointed member of the Rules Advisory Committee, so I was just going to listen in. But this afternoon, as I was looking through the comments that have come in as a part of the public comment process, I was disturbed enough that I thought I wanted to at least weigh in to say, I hope this doesn't devolve into another one of those processes where the facts themselves become part of a political debate. So the fact is drones disturb wildlife. That's well documented. My organization, I guess I should have introduced myself as the executive director of the Oregon Shores Conservation Coalition. We will be joining other groups in submitting a written comment with footnotes and so on, actually demonstrating that there's plenty of research indicating how disturbing drones are to wildlife. So my point here is that's a fact. Any discussion should start with that fact. I saw lots of comments saying, oh, drones don't really disturb wildlife, or don't worry, wildlife, or drone operators are very sensitive and there's only a few bad actors. It's not a matter of bad actors. Drone operators aren't wildlife managers. They don't understand the impacts they're having. It is, the existence of drones is a problem for wildlife, period. And OPRD is responsible for protecting the wildlife in state parks and especially on our public shoreline and offshore. So again, I want the conversation to begin with. We know that drones are disturbing wildlife. So where can we allow them that does not disturb wildlife? That should be the basic consideration. I don't think a lot of people are really understanding such things as, again, the fact someone earlier in this session commented, well, there's other kinds of human impacts. Highway 101 goes near the shoreline and so on. Yeah, but people aren't getting out to offshore rocks. They're not getting up on cliffs where rhinoceros auklets or cormorants nest. People walking below aren't disturbing them. A drone up at the level where they're nesting will be disturbing them. Migratory birds using the coast, but also inland, using inland lakes and so on, are often very vulnerable. They're really on a knife edge of getting enough energy to complete their migrations down to Latin America or north to Alaska. And if they're being disturbed while they're trying to feed, it could actually be fatal. So anyway, and then particularly, and it's been mentioned, snowy plovers are at risk from drones, which are raptor shaped and thus likely to disturb them. And the state, through OPRD, is responsible for protecting and restoring the snowy plover population, through our habitat conservation plan, which is an agreement with the federal government. And so no place where snowy plovers nest or are potentially could nest should be within reach of a drone. So since state parks can't manage where people fly once they've taken off, it's really critical that takeoff and landing areas be located far enough from areas where wildlife is threatened, and that's very extensive on the coast and in many places inland as well, that the drones can't reach those places within line of sight of the operators, which is what's supposed to be the limit of drone operation. I also just wanted to quickly note, I'm really taken aback at the idea of permits being allowed in areas that would otherwise be closed. A local park manager isn't a wildlife manager either. And no, if places are closed because we're protecting habitat areas, I would not want to see just a park manager who was not particularly versed in for instance, the nesting of seabirds offshore to just make an off-the-cuff decision to allow someone. If places are off limits, they're off limits for a reason and should stay off limits. And just a little pushback, there was no presence of conservation groups or the Fish and Wildlife Service or other resource agencies at that first RAC meeting. And I participated in the second one, and I don't see any change from the direction that was set at the first one when it was all drone operators that were participating. And it's really particularly worrisome the Fish and Wildlife Service was not involved. So I would really urge a step back here to include those groups and really revisit all of the assumptions in the rules as they've been drafted. Finally, I would really like to underscore that there are enough questions here that there should be another public comment when the next draft is issued, whether it's considered the proposed final draft or the next iteration. But in any case, this April 7th should not be end of the chance of the public to comment once we see what the direction is of the final draft. So please do have another public comment at that period. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Philip. So the last person that I have on the list is Scott, and I'm going to just click allow to speak, Scott. And if you want to unmute, then you should be able to speak. I'm not able to move you in as a panelist, but you can click unmute. Are you able to do that? If you're on the phone, you may have to hit *6. And if you're not wishing to comment, oh, there, you're unmuted. So feel free to share your public comments.
I just have heard a lot of interesting things tonight from people that really do not know drones. They're actually very quiet and they do not disturb most shorebirds. Even though I respect that during the nesting season, these birds should be protected. And I think there should be a compromise between drone operators and what is necessary to protect the birds and also allow people to enjoy the Oregon parks that have handicaps or are unable to see them from their area. I wish that these people could present the data that they have said that they have as to the harassment of birds. I don't think any responsible drone operator wants to harass birds or lose a multi-thousand-dollar drone into the ocean or someplace else because of irresponsibility from the operator. Part 107 also has many regulations as to where you can operate and how close you can operate to humans and altitudes, and many other things. Most of the people that have spoken tonight are obviously Audubon people, and I would like nothing more than to be a falconer, because I love birds, and I especially love birds of prey. I think that birds of prey probably present more of a problem to any nesting birds than drones do. Certainly, there should be certain times of the year where drones cannot fly, and there should be certain areas that drones should never fly. But I think that there needs to be a compromise as to regulations, and Part 107 covers many of these. If the Audubon people are not aware of Part 107, they should read it. It regulates flying over people, flying over cars, and many other things. I think that there needs to be a compromise, and I think the Oregon Parks and education amongst law enforcement, the park rangers, and personal people should meet together. But if you're worried about photographing from the air because of personal privacy, that all can be done from the ground. There's no place that you can photograph from a drone that you cannot photograph from the ground. If you are at Rooster Rock Park in the nudist section, you have lost your right to public privacy. If you are other places where you are outdoors, you have lost your public privacy. Yeah, you want to ask me a question?
No, I just was going to thank you for your comments, Scott. Did you have any final wrap-up comments?
Yes, I do. I think that people misunderstand the loudness of drones. Drones are not very loud. I can fly a drone 200 feet above your head and you will not hear it. Thank you for your time.
Great, thank you so much for being here. We've now reached through the list of folks signed up for commenting. Was there anyone that I missed? I'm going to share my screen and just thank you all for attending this evening, and reminder that you can continue to submit written comments on our website in writing or via email through April 7th at 5 p.m. And we appreciate you taking the time to share your thoughts with us this evening and in writing on any of these needs. So thank you all for attending this evening and for your thoughtful consideration of the proposed rules. So thank you so much for attending this evening. That wraps up our public hearing. We will be doing another public hearing tomorrow evening that is intended to focus more on the Ocean Shores rules. So you're welcome to join tomorrow evening as well. Thanks so much, and everybody have a great evening.